What was the biggest scandal at your high school? Our queen bee Giselle hadn't shown up to school in 3 days, and when I saw her best friend crying in the bathroom, I knew something was seriously wrong. The police said she ran away, but Giselle was supposed to be valedictorian, had just gotten into Yale, and never seemed like she had any problems in the world. Why would she run? Her boyfriend Miles wouldn't even look at me when I asked when he'd last seen her, just mumbled something about a fight and walked away. So I started investigating. The first thing I found was hidden in her locker when I convinced the janitor to let me grab something I'd supposedly left in there. Behind her perfect color-coded notebooks was a burner phone with messages from someone saved as Just X, talking about meeting up for supplies, and how she owed him $3,000. The text got increasingly threatening, saying she couldn't just walk away, that she knew what would happen if she tried to quit. I went to the address from one of the messages and found this rundown house on the edge of town, where older guys were always hanging around. One of them recognized Giselle's photo immediately, and said she used to come by every week to pick up party favors that she'd sell to rich kids at private school parties. He said she was trying to get out of the business, but you don't just leave when you owe money. And the last time he saw her, she had a bruised jaw that she blamed on walking into a door. I found out she'd been arrested 2 months ago for possession with intent to distribute, but her parents had hired a lawyer who kept it quiet. The court date was in 2 weeks, and if convicted, Yale would rescind her acceptance, and her whole perfect future would collapse. I cornered Miles in the parking lot after school, and he tried to get into his car, but I blocked the door. "Just tell me what happened between you two," I said. His hands were shaking as he lit a cigarette, something I'd never seen him do before. "You want to know what happened?" "She hit me first," he said, pulling up his sleeve to show scratch marks. "We were fighting about the pills she was selling, and she went crazy, started screaming that I didn't understand, that she needed the money for something important." He took a long drag and looked away. "So yeah, I grabbed her arms to stop her from hitting me, and maybe I held on too hard. But I didn't. I would never." His voice cracked. "She said she was going to end everything, make a clean break, and I thought she meant us, but maybe she meant something else. But then I found out about the teacher, Mr. Harris, who taught AP history and was married with 2 kids. Giselle's friend admitted she'd been seeing him secretly for months, meeting at hotels 2 towns over, and he'd been giving her money for the business ventures she was involved in. She had photos of them together on a hidden Instagram account, and in the last one she'd posted, you could see fear in her eyes even though she was smiling. I followed Mr. Harris to his house after school and watched from across the street as he built a fire in his backyard. He was throwing in papers, and I could see the orange flames reflected in his glasses as he watched them burn. His wife came outside and said something sharp that I couldn't hear, but he just kept feeding papers into the fire. When they both went inside, I crept over and grabbed a half-burned page that had blown away from the pile. It was a printed email from Giselle. "If you don't leave your wife like you promised, I'm telling everyone everything. You can't buy my silence anymore." At the bottom, in his handwriting, "If you tell anyone, I'll destroy you first." I looked up and saw his wife watching me from the kitchen window, and she just stood there for a moment before slowly closing the curtains. The dealer from the house called me and said Giselle had come by the night she disappeared, paid off her whole debt in cash, and said she was done forever. He said she seemed scared, kept checking her phone, and mentioned she had one more meeting to get through before she could leave town. He didn't know who with, but she'd said it was someone who could ruin her life if she didn't show up. I found her car hidden behind an abandoned warehouse by the river, the doors unlocked and her phone still inside. There was blood on the driver's seat. Not a lot, but enough to make my stomach drop. Her packed suitcase was in the trunk along with $10,000 in cash and a bus ticket to Portland leaving that same night. She'd been planning to run, had almost made it, but something stopped her. Following the trail from her car, I walked through the woods toward the river, and that's when I saw something pink caught on a branch. It was her sweater, the one she'd worn in her last Instagram post, torn and muddy. My hands were shaking as I followed the path deeper into the woods, finding more pieces of evidence like breadcrumbs leading to something I didn't want to find. I found Giselle at the bottom of the ravine, partially hidden under fallen leaves, still wearing her Yale sweatshirt. Her eyes were open, staring at nothing, and there were bruises around her throat that told me this wasn't an accident or suicide. Someone had killed her and left her here where they thought no one would look. Standing there in the fading light, I thought about everyone who had a reason to want her gone. Miles with his violent temper, Mr. Harris with his career to protect, the dealer she owed money to, even her parents who couldn't handle the shame. But which one of them had actually done it? My fingers fumble with my phone and I almost drop it twice before I manage to dial 911. The operator answers and asks what my emergency is, and I try to explain, but my voice comes out wrong, shaky and too high. I tell her I found a body, a girl from my school, and she's dead at the bottom of the ravine near the abandoned warehouse. The operator asks if I'm sure she's dead, and I look back at Giselle's open eyes staring at nothing and say, "Yes, I'm sure. There are bruises on her neck." She tells me to stay on the line and not touch anything, that police are on their way, and I realize my face is wet because I've been crying without noticing when it started. 2 police cars show up faster than I expected, their lights flashing red and blue through the trees, and I wave my arm so they can see where I am. The officers come running with flashlights even though it's not completely dark yet, and when they reach the edge and look down at Giselle, one of them immediately radios for more units and tells me to step back from the scene. They scramble down the slope carefully, their boots sliding on loose dirt and leaves, and one officer kneels next to Giselle, while the other one starts unrolling yellow tape around the trees. The officer who stayed up top with me asks my name and why I was out here, and I explain about following the trail from her car, about finding her torn sweater on the branch. He writes everything in a small notebook, his face serious and hard to read, and my stomach hurts watching him, because this is real now. This is actually happening. More cars arrive, and suddenly there are people everywhere. Officers talking into radios and someone setting up lights, and I feel like I'm watching it all from far away, even though I'm standing right here. A man in regular clothes shows up just as the sun disappears completely, and he walks over to me with a flashlight in his hand. He says his name is Detective Cedric Compton and asks to see the burned paper I'm holding, the one I grabbed from Mr. Harris's fire. I hand it to him and he reads it under his flashlight, his eyes moving slowly across the words. Then he looks at me and asks how I came to have this evidence. I tell him about following Mr. Harris, about watching him burn papers in his backyard, and Compton's expression doesn't change, but he folds the paper carefully and puts it in a plastic bag. He explains they'll need to contact Giselle's parents and the school, that processing the scene will take hours, maybe all night. I realize I'm about to be at the center of the biggest thing that's ever happened in this town, that everyone will know I found her, and the weight of that makes it hard to breathe. An officer drives me home around midnight, and my phone has been buzzing nonstop in my pocket. I finally look at it, and there are hundreds of messages, texts, and social media notifications, because someone saw the police cars and posted about it online. The rumors are already spreading, people saying Giselle killed herself or got attacked by some random person, and nobody knows yet that I'm the one who found her body. I scroll through the messages and see people asking if I've heard what happened, if I know anything, and I don't respond to any of them. School gets canceled the next morning, and they send out an email saying there will be a memorial service and counselors available for anyone who needs support. I watch my phone fill up with posts from students, crying selfies and long, heartfelt messages about how much they loved Giselle, how she was such an amazing person. My anger builds reading them because half these people were talking trash about her just last week, calling her stuck up and fake, and now they're acting like she was their best friend. Monica Anderson calls me that afternoon and asks me to come to her office, and when I get there, she has that concerned counselor expression on her face. She suggests gently that maybe I should let the police handle the investigation from here, that I've done enough by finding Giselle. I try to explain that I can't just stop now, that I know things the police might not discover on their own, but she doesn't understand. Detective Compton schedules a formal interview for the next day and warns me not to do any more investigating on my own. He's polite, but his voice is firm when he explains that I could mess up evidence or put myself in danger, and I nod and say okay, even though I know I probably won't listen. I try texting Miles later to see how he's doing, to check if he's okay, but our conversation goes bad fast. I ask where he was the night Giselle disappeared, and he tells me to stop playing detective and leave him alone. Before I can respond, he blocks my number, and I'm left staring at my phone feeling worse than before. The memorial service happens 2 days later at the school auditorium. I sit in the back row watching everyone file in wearing black and looking sad. Mr. Harris stands with the other teachers near the front, his face appropriately serious as he nods at students who walk past. I study his hands from across the room and notice his cuticles look red and raw, like he scrubbed them too hard or burned them on something hot. That observation makes my stomach tighten because I remember the fire in his backyard, the papers burning, and now his damaged fingers tell a story he probably doesn't want anyone to read. The cold feeling I had before turns sharper and more certain. He's involved in this somehow. I know it in my bones, and those burned hands are proof he tried to destroy evidence. The service drags on with people giving speeches about how perfect Giselle was, and I have to grip the armrest to keep from standing up and screaming the truth at everyone. School stays closed for the rest of the week while police search the area around the ravine. I hear through Byron that they're taking their time, going over every inch of ground with metal detectors and dogs. He texts me on Thursday saying they found a partial shoe print in the mud about 20 feet from where Giselle's body was. The print is smudged and incomplete, but it's something physical that might lead somewhere if they can match it to someone's shoes. I save his message and add it to my mental list of evidence that keeps growing longer every day. Friday morning, Detective Compton calls and asks me to come to the police station for a formal interview. My mom drives me downtown and waits in the lobby while I follow the detective to a small room with a table and recording equipment. The interview lasts 3 hours as I walk him through everything I discovered. I start with the burner phone in Giselle's locker and work my way through the drug house, Buck's information about her debt, the hidden Instagram account with Mr. Harris, the burned emails, her packed car with the cash and bus ticket. Detective Compton listens carefully and takes notes in a small notebook, occasionally stopping me to ask questions that show he's paying attention to details. He wants to know exact times, specific addresses, who else was present when I found things. His questions are precise, and I try to answer as accurately as possible because I know this matters. Then his tone changes, and he asks why I broke into Giselle's locker. The way he says it makes my chest tighten because I can tell this is a problem. I explain about the janitor letting me in, about claiming I left something there, but he shakes his head slowly. He warns me that my credibility could be questioned if I obtained evidence through questionable means. Defense attorneys might argue I planted things or contaminated the scene, and suddenly I feel defensive and guilty at the same time. I didn't think about that when I was investigating. I just wanted to find the truth. But now I see how my methods could backfire. The interview ends with him thanking me for my cooperation and reminding me to let the police handle things from here. School reopens on Monday, but it feels different now, like someone replaced our normal building with a stage set. Press trucks line the street outside, and journalists with cameras crowd the parking lot. The student newspaper suddenly has real reporters calling them, asking for interviews with anyone who knew about Giselle's secret life. Byron looks stressed every time I see him in the hallway, his phone constantly buzzing with messages. The whole situation feels wrong and overexposed, like we're all being watched constantly by people who don't actually care about Giselle but just want a good story. I keep my head down and try to get to class without being noticed, but it's impossible when there are cameras everywhere. Byron catches me between second and third period, pulling me aside near the lockers. He asks if I'll talk to him off the record about what I found during my investigation. His expression is earnest, and he promises anything I say will stay anonymous. But I refuse. I'm not ready to have my name attached to this publicly, even in some vague, unnamed way. I don't trust that anything I tell him will actually stay private once it gets into a newspaper article, and I've already got enough problems with Detective Compton questioning my methods. Byron looks disappointed, but nods like he understands. That evening, the school holds a candlelight vigil in the football stadium, and hundreds of people show up. Students, parents, teachers, even people from other schools who never met Giselle but want to be part of the moment. I stand near the back watching everyone light their candles and listening to people share memories. Giselle's best friend gets up to speak and makes it about halfway through before she breaks down completely. She sobs about how Giselle was living this double life none of them knew about, how she seemed so perfect on the outside, but was dealing with things nobody understood. The crowd murmurs sympathetically, and people wipe their eyes. I feel sad watching her cry, but I also feel angry at all the fake grief surrounding me. Half these people talked trash about Giselle last week, calling her stuck up and fake, and now they're acting like she was their closest friend. They're grieving the perfect image they created, not the real complicated person who sold drugs and had an affair with a teacher and owed money to dangerous people. The next morning, I drive to Miles's house because I need to talk to him about his timeline. The police apparently asked him to clarify where he was the night Giselle died, and I want to hear his answer directly. He opens the door looking tired and reluctant, but lets me inside. We sit in his living room, and he tells me he was home alone playing video games that whole night. His parents were at some dinner party and didn't get back until after midnight. I ask if anyone can verify that, and he shakes his head. His alibi is weak, and he knows it, his eyes dropping to the floor as he admits he has no proof. But something in his expression makes me think he's telling the truth even if he can't prove it. He looks genuinely sad and scared, not guilty, and I've gotten pretty good at reading people over the past week. After leaving Miles's place, I drive out to the drug house where Buck lives. I need to ask him more questions about Giselle's last visit. When I knock on the door, Buck answers, but this time he won't even let me inside. He tells me to get lost before his enforcer gets back, his voice harder than before. I push back asking what he means, and he mentions that the enforcer wasn't around the night Giselle disappeared, was out of town on some business. That detail seems important somehow, like maybe Buck is trying to tell me something without saying it directly. I leave before the enforcer shows up because I'm not stupid enough to stick around for that. Later that afternoon, Detective Compton calls with new information. He tells me they got the bus depot records and Giselle's ticket to Portland was never scanned. She bought it and had it with her in the car, but she never actually got on that bus. Something stopped her between packing up her car with the money and leaving town forever. Someone convinced her to meet them, or threatened her, or intercepted her somehow, and that meeting ended with her dead at the bottom of a ravine. The next morning at the school, I wait in the parking lot until I see Mr. Harris arrive in his silver sedan. He parks in the teacher lot and gets out carrying his leather briefcase like everything is normal. I walk past his car slowly with my phone out, pretending to text, but really taking photos of the mud caked all over his tires and splattered up the side panels. The mud is thick and dark, the kind you only get near the river where the ground stays wet even when it hasn't rained. My hands shake as I snap picture after picture, because this feels different from everything else I've found. More real somehow. He could have been at the ravine, could have stood right where Giselle died, and now there's proof on his car. I send the photos to Detective Compton right away with a message explaining where I took them and why the mud matters. My heart pounds as I walk into school because I know I'm getting closer to something dangerous, and there's no going back now. Before first period, my phone buzzes with a text from the office telling me Monica wants to see me immediately. I walk down the empty hallway feeling my stomach twist because I know this isn't going to be good. Monica is sitting behind her desk when I enter, and she doesn't smile or ask me to sit down. She tells me the school has received complaints that I've been harassing staff members, specifically following Mr. Harris and taking photos of his property without permission. Her voice is quiet, but firm as she explains that if I keep this up, I could face expulsion for creating a hostile environment. I start to argue that I'm trying to find out who killed Giselle, but she holds up her hand to stop me. She says she understands I want justice, but this isn't the way to get it, that I need to let the police do their job. The thing that makes me maddest is realizing the school cares more about protecting Mr. Harris than finding out the truth. Monica is trying to help me in her own way, but it feels like everyone in power wants me to shut up and go away. I leave her office feeling angry and alone, knowing I can't stop even if it means getting kicked out of school. Later that day, Detective Compton calls me and his voice sounds tired. He tells me he has some information about Giselle that makes the whole situation even sadder. Yale officially took back her acceptance after they found out about her arrest for drug dealing. Even though she's dead now, they went through with it, which means all her hard work and perfect grades and dreams of the future meant nothing in the end. She was trying so hard to escape her mistakes and start fresh somewhere new, but she never got that chance. The detective says this detail matters because it shows how much pressure she was under in those final days, how trapped she must have felt with everything falling apart. I think about her packing that suitcase with $10,000 and a bus ticket to Portland, how close she came to getting away. If she had just made it onto that bus, she might still be alive, but someone stopped her and now she'll never get to start over. The news makes me feel sick and angry because Giselle deserved better than what happened to her. By lunchtime, everyone at the school is talking about the article Byron published in the student newspaper. He wrote about emails between Giselle and a teacher without saying which teacher it was, but he included enough details that people are guessing. I hear students in the hallway whispering about which male teachers have nice cars or who seem too friendly with Giselle. Some kids think it's Mr. Harris, but others are defending him, saying he would never do something like that. Byron finds me after school and I tell him I'm glad he's helping get the truth out there, but I'm worried this might make things worse. He says people deserve to know what was happening even if it's uncomfortable, that covering up the truth is what let this situation get so bad in the first place. I understand what he means, but part of me wishes we could have built a stronger case before going public. Now Mr. Harris knows people are suspicious, and he might be more careful about covering his tracks. The forensics report arrives at the police station and Detective Compton calls to tell me what it says. Giselle died from being strangled by someone using their hands, someone who was right-handed based on the pattern of bruises on her throat. Reading those words makes me feel physically sick, because I keep imagining what her last moments must have been like. Someone put their hands around her neck and squeezed until she couldn't breathe anymore, until her eyes went empty, and she fell down that ravine. The person who did this is still walking around free, maybe teaching classes or eating dinner with their family like nothing happened. The clinical language in the report makes it worse somehow. All those medical terms describing how someone murdered a teenage girl. I save the details in my phone even though looking at them makes my hands shake because this is evidence that matters. Proof of exactly how she died. That evening, Miles calls me, and I can hear he's been crying before he even says anything. His voice breaks as he tells me he needs to show me something he's been too scared to share before. He plays a voicemail Giselle left him on the night she disappeared, and I listen to her voice coming through the phone speaker. She sounds scared and shaky as she says she's about to meet someone, and if anything happens to her, Miles needs to tell the police everything. She doesn't say who she's meeting, but you can hear the fear in every word, like she knows this might be the last time she talks to anyone. Miles is crying harder now as he explains he's been carrying this guilt for days, thinking he should have called her back or driven to find her or done something to stop what happened. I tell him it's not his fault, but I don't think he believes me. The voicemail is another piece of evidence showing Giselle knew she was in danger that night, that this wasn't some random attack but a planned meeting that went wrong. I drive back out to Buck's house even though I know it's risky going there again. This time when I knock, he actually opens the door and lets me inside instead of telling me to leave. The house smells like smoke and old pizza, and there are empty beer bottles on the coffee table. Buck sits down on the couch, and I stay standing because I don't want to get too comfortable here. He confirms what he told me before about Giselle coming by the night she disappeared to pay off her debt. He describes how she had the money in banded stacks of $10 bills, like she had been saving it up for a while. She seemed really scared, according to Buck. Kept checking her phone every few minutes like she was waiting for a message or worried about the time. He says she told him she had to get to one more meeting before she could leave town for good. Buck didn't ask who the meeting was with because that's not his business, but now he wishes he had pushed her for details. I ask if he noticed anything else weird about her that night, and he mentions she had a bruise on her wrist that looked fresh, like someone had grabbed her hard. That detail makes my stomach hurt because it means someone had already hurt her before she died. The next day, Detective Compton asks me to come to the police station because he wants to show me something. He pulls up an image on his computer screen from an ATM camera showing Giselle withdrawing money on the afternoon before she died. Her face looks tense and worried in the grainy footage, nothing like the confident girl everyone knew at the school. She keeps looking around like she thinks someone might be watching her, and her hands are shaking as she counts the bills the machine spits out. The detective explains this is the last confirmed sighting of Giselle alive except for whoever killed her. Looking at that image makes me feel haunted because she had no idea she only had a few hours left to live. She was trying so hard to get enough money to escape and start over, but it wasn't enough to save her. I take a photo of the screen with my phone even though I probably shouldn't, because I want to remember her face in that moment, want to remember why I'm doing all this investigating. After school, I follow Mr. Harris again, even though Monica warned me not to. He drives across town to a rundown motel on the edge where the paint is peeling and half the letters on the sign are burned out. I park down the street and watch as an older man in a pickup truck pulls up and Mr. Harris gets out of his car to meet him. They talk for a few minutes in the parking lot and I can see Mr. Harris looks nervous, keeps running his hand through his hair. I write down the license plate number of the truck in my phone, my heart beating fast because I'm definitely crossing into dangerous territory now. If Mr. Harris sees me following him, things could get really bad, really fast. The two men go inside one of the motel rooms and I wait in my car for 20 minutes until they come back out. The older man hands Mr. Harris what looks like a folder or envelope, and they shake hands before driving away in opposite directions. I don't know what that meeting was about, but it seemed shady enough that I send the license plate to Detective Compton right away. The police run the plate and call me back the next morning with the results. The truck belongs to a local contractor who has a sealed misdemeanor on his record from years ago, but nothing recent. Detective Compton sounds frustrated as he explains the connection seems weak and might not lead anywhere useful. He tells me the whole investigation is moving too slowly, and he can feel pressure from his bosses to solve this case quickly before the media attention gets worse. I can hear in his voice that he's tired and stressed, that this case is weighing on him more than he wants to admit. The fact that we keep finding evidence but can't quite connect all the pieces is making everyone involved feel desperate and angry. I wonder if we'll ever figure out exactly what happened that night, or if some parts of the truth will stay hidden forever. The next day, the principal calls my parents in for a meeting, and I sit there in his office while he tells them I've been trespassing near a staff member's house and harassing Mr. Harris. My mom looks confused and asks what he's talking about, and I have to explain everything I've been doing for the past week. I tell them about following Mr. Harris, about the burned emails, about the dealer and the drug house and Giselle's packed car. My dad's face goes pale and he keeps asking why I didn't come to them first, why I put myself in danger like this. The principal threatens suspension if I continue interfering with the police investigation, and my parents just nod along looking scared and angry. When we get home, my mom cries and says she can't believe I was putting myself at risk, and I feel guilty but also frustrated because someone had to do something. The police set up a meeting with the assistant district attorney the next morning, and I sit across from Elia Roman in a small conference room at the courthouse. She's younger than I expected, maybe 30, and she spreads out all my evidence on the table between us. She picks up each piece and examines it carefully, then explains that most of what I found might not be allowed in court depending on how I got it. The burned email could be thrown out because I took it from private property without permission. The burner phone might be excluded because I accessed Giselle's locker under false pretenses. She talks about chain of custody and reasonable expectation of privacy, and I realize justice is way more complicated than just finding the truth. She says everything is interesting and helpful for directing the investigation, but a defense lawyer could challenge almost all of it. I leave feeling defeated because I risked so much, and it might not even matter in court. That afternoon, Detective Compton calls with better news. Miles's neighbor came forward after seeing the news coverage, and she confirms his car was in the driveway during the entire time window when Giselle was killed. She remembers because she was up late with a sick baby and kept looking out the window. The detective tells me this basically clears Miles as a suspect, and I feel this weird mix of relief and guilt. Relief because Miles probably didn't kill his girlfriend, but guilt because I suspected him and made his grief harder by treating him like a criminal. I think about the scratch marks on his arms and how scared he looked in the parking lot, and I feel bad for doubting him. The next day, Detective Compton updates me again, this time about Buck's enforcer. The guy has an outstanding warrant in another state and wasn't even in town the night Giselle disappeared. The police confirmed he was 3 states away dealing with his own legal problems. Another suspect crossed off the list, which should make me happy but instead just makes me more anxious. We're running out of options and the evidence keeps pointing in one direction, toward Mr. Harris. But we still don't have enough to prove he actually killed her. The detective sounds frustrated too, like he can feel the pressure to solve this case quickly before the media attention gets worse. The forensics team finishes analyzing the ash from Mr. Harris's backyard fire, and they call Detective Compton with the results. The ash matches the specific type of thermal paper used in email printouts, the kind that comes from the office printers. This confirms he was definitely burning printed emails, which means he was destroying evidence. I feel this surge of vindication when the detective tells me, but also genuine fear because this proves Mr. Harris had something serious to hide. Someone who destroys evidence right after a murder is someone who knows they're guilty. My hands shake as I write down the details in my investigation notebook. Byron texts me the next morning saying he found something big in the school district records. He managed to get access to old personnel files through a Freedom of Information request, and he discovered the school quietly settled multiple complaints against Mr. Harris years ago. Nothing was ever proven, and the complaints were sealed, But there were at least 3 separate incidents involving inappropriate behavior with female students. The school paid money to make the problems go away instead of investigating properly or firing him. I'm furious reading through Byron's notes, outraged that the system protected a predator instead of the students he was supposed to teach. This pattern of behavior goes back almost a decade, and everyone just looked the other way. I drive past Mr. Harris's house that afternoon and park down the street where I can watch without being obvious. His wife comes outside and they start arguing in the driveway, her body language sharp and angry. She's pointing at him and shaking her head, and even from this distance I can see how hurt she looks. Byron shows up a few minutes later and tries to approach her for a comment, but she just walks back inside without saying anything. Her silence feels like its own kind of answer, though, like she knows something is very wrong but isn't ready to admit it publicly. I wonder how long she's known about the affair, about the inappropriate relationships with students, about all of it. Detective Compton gets a warrant for Mr. Harris's email account 2 days later, and the tech team discovers he deleted hundreds of messages right after Giselle disappeared. The actual content is mostly gone, wiped from the servers, but the deletion pattern itself is damning. He systematically erased every email to and from Giselle's address, plus dozens of other messages sent around the same time. The detective explains this shows consciousness of guilt, that innocent people don't destroy evidence. Even though we can't read the deleted emails, the fact that he deleted them so carefully tells us he knew they were incriminating. The tech team working on Giselle's phone recovers some deleted data from the internal memory, and they find a calendar entry for the night she died. It just says R with a dash and then 8 p.m., no other details or context. We don't know what R stands for yet, whether it's a person or a place, but it's another piece falling into place. The detective says they're working on figuring out what R could mean, checking all Giselle's contacts and known locations for anything that matches. I add it to my notes and try to think of anything starting with R that connects to the case. The financial investigation team pulls Giselle's Venmo records, and they find a pattern of payments going back several months. There are dozens of transactions labeled tutoring, each one for $50 or $100, and they're all coming from an account linked to Mr. Harris's email address. The payments total up to thousands of dollars over time, way more than anyone would pay for actual tutoring. I feel sick looking at the transaction history, realizing he was paying her for something, probably to keep the affair going or to keep her quiet about it. The last payment was 2 days before she disappeared, and the memo just says one more session. Detective Compton says this financial trail is some of the strongest evidence they have because it's hard to explain away as anything innocent. The bus depot attendant called the police tip line 3 days after the news ran a story about Giselle's case. He worked the night shift and remembered a young woman matching her description, arguing with a man near the payphones around 8:30 that evening. Detective Compton brought me in to listen to the interview recording, and the attendant's voice was shaky as he described how the woman was crying and trying to pull away from the man who kept grabbing her arm. He couldn't hear what they were saying because he was inside the ticket booth, but he remembered thinking he should call someone if it got worse. The woman had blonde hair and wore a Yale sweatshirt, and she kept looking toward the bus platforms like she wanted to run. The man was taller, maybe 40 or 50 years old, wearing dark clothes and glasses that reflected the parking lot lights. The attendant watched them for a few minutes before getting called away to help another customer, and when he looked back, they were gone. He felt guilty for not doing more, for not checking if she was okay, and now he couldn't stop thinking about how she ended up dead just hours later. Detective Compton scheduled him to work with a police sketch artist the next morning, and I asked if I could be there when they finished the drawing. The detective hesitated but eventually agreed, probably because I'd been right about so many things already. The sketch artist spent 2 hours with the attendant, adjusting features and proportions based on his memory of that night. When she finally turned the pad around to show us the finished drawing, my stomach dropped. The face looked enough like Mr. Harris to make my hands shake, the same angular jaw and thin nose, the same way his glasses sat on his face. It wasn't perfect. Witnesses never remember everything exactly right, but the resemblance was strong enough to be seriously concerning. Detective Compton studied it carefully and made notes, but he warned me not to get too excited about this development. The attendant saw the man from a distance through glass, in poor lighting, for just a few minutes several weeks ago. Memory is unreliable, and sketch artists can only work with what witnesses give them, which means this drawing might not be accurate enough to use as real evidence. I took a photo of the sketch anyway and sent it to Byron, who immediately wanted to publish it in his next article. I told him to wait because Detective Compton would be furious if we released it before the police finished their investigation. Aliyah Roman called me that afternoon to discuss the sketch, and her tone was careful and measured as she explained the legal problems with eyewitness identification. Resemblance isn't the same as positive identification, and defense lawyers tear apart this kind of evidence all the time in court. The attendant never said he could identify the man, just that he remembered certain features, and those features happened to match someone we already suspect. That's not enough to charge anyone with murder, not even close, because reasonable doubt would be easy to establish. She needed me to understand that we were building a circumstantial case, piece by piece, and no single piece of evidence would be enough on its own. Everything had to work together to create a complete picture that left no other reasonable explanation. I felt frustrated, but I knew she was right, that wanting Mr. Harris to be guilty wasn't the same as proving it. Monica caught me in the hallway the next day and pulled me into her office with a concerned expression. She suggested I join a trauma support group that met twice a week for students dealing with grief and difficult situations. I snapped at her that I wasn't the one who needed therapy, that the system that protected a predator for years was the one with the real problem. My voice came out harsher than I meant it to, and I saw her flinch at my tone. She tried to explain that she was worried about me, that I was carrying too much weight for someone my age, but I just felt tired of everyone treating me like I was the problem instead of the solution. I regretted my tone immediately because Monica had been trying to help in her own way, but I was so exhausted from being told to stop investigating, to let the adults handle things, to focus on my own healing. How could I heal when Giselle's killer was still walking around free, teaching classes and grading papers like nothing happened? I left her office feeling guilty and angry at the same time, emotions that seemed to define everything lately. That night, an anonymous message appeared in my DMs on Instagram, and my blood ran cold as I read it. The message told me to drop the teacher angle or I would regret it, that I was playing with fire and didn't understand who I was messing with. There was no profile picture, just a blank gray circle, and the account had been created that same day with 0 followers. I screenshot the message with shaking hands and sent it directly to Detective Compton, along with a text explaining what happened. He called me within 5 minutes and his voice was serious as he asked if I'd received any other threats or noticed anyone following me. I told him this was the first direct threat, though I'd felt watched lately in ways I couldn't quite explain. He said he was taking this seriously and would assign patrol cars to drive by my house regularly, especially at night when I was home. The police presence started the next day, and I watched through my bedroom window as a patrol car rolled past every few hours. It made me feel both safer and more trapped, like I was living in a prison of my own making. My parents were scared and wanted me to stop investigating completely, to delete everything I'd collected and let the police handle it from here. My mom cried when she saw the patrol car, asking why I couldn't just be a normal teenager worried about college applications instead of murder investigations. My dad was quieter, but I could see the fear in his eyes every time he looked at me, like he was afraid of losing me the same way Giselle's parents lost her. I tried to explain that I couldn't let Giselle down now when we were so close to proving what happened, that stopping would mean her killer might get away with it, but they didn't understand. Or maybe they understood too well, and that's what scared them. I felt guilty for putting them through this stress, for bringing danger to our house, but I also couldn't imagine walking away when we had so much evidence pointing in one direction. The next morning at the school, I engineered a conversation with Mr. Harris in the hallway during passing period when other students could hear. I walked up to him near his classroom and asked him directly about the emails he'd deleted, about the money he'd paid Giselle, about where he was the night she disappeared. He got flustered immediately, his face turning red as he stammered that I couldn't prove anything. Those words hung in the air between us, and I saw several students stop to watch our confrontation. His response was basically an admission that there was something to prove, that he had things to hide and everyone who heard him knew it. He tried to recover by telling me to get to class and stop spreading rumors, but his voice shook and his hands trembled as he turned away. I felt triumphant and terrified at the same time, knowing I'd just made myself an even bigger target. Byron's Timeline article got picked up by regional news outlets 2 days later, and suddenly our small town was national news. The article laid out everything we knew about Giselle's disappearance and death, the drug dealing, the affair with a teacher, the threatening emails, all of it presented in careful language that avoided naming Mr. Harris directly. But everyone knew who Byron was writing about, and the town split into camps overnight. Some people thought I was a hero for pursuing justice when the police seemed slow to act. Others thought I was making things worse, destroying a man's reputation based on circumstantial evidence and teenage gossip. The attention was exhausting, and I just wanted this to be over. Wanted to go back to being invisible instead of having strangers recognize me at the grocery store. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing with messages from people I barely knew, some supportive and others hostile, and I had to turn off notifications just to think clearly. The forensics report came back with news that made my hands shake when Detective Compton called to tell me. The partial shoe print they'd found in the mud near the ravine matched a specific brand and size that Mr. Harris wore. They'd checked his shoe size from the school records and confirmed he wore size 11, the same as the print, and the tread pattern matched a common brand of dress shoes he'd been seen wearing. It wasn't definite proof he was there because thousands of people wore that brand and size, but combined with everything else, the circumstantial evidence was building into something solid. Each piece alone might not be enough, but together they created a picture that was hard to ignore. Buck called me from a burner phone the next afternoon, his voice nervous as he offered to trade information. He said he knew things about Mr. Harris's motel meetings, about what happened there and who else was involved, and he'd tell me everything in exchange for me talking to the DA about leniency on his drug charges. I was skeptical because Buck had his own reasons to lie, his own agenda to protect, but I was also interested because he might know things nobody else did. He'd been part of that world. had connections and information that regular people wouldn't have access to. I told him I'd think about it and talk to Detective Compton first, that I couldn't promise anything about his charges, but I'd see what could be done. Detective Compton corroborated Buck's story about motel receipts paid in cash when I brought him the information. The police had been tracking Mr. Harris's movements and found records of him paying for rooms at cheap motels on dates that aligned perfectly with the timeline of deleted emails. The receipts were always cash, so there was no credit card trail, but the motel clerks remembered him because he always looked nervous and paid for just a few hours at a time. Everything was connecting in ways that made Mr. Harris look more guilty with each new piece of evidence, and I could feel we were getting close to something that would finally bring justice for Giselle. Miles texted me 2 days later asking to meet at the parking lot after school, and when I got there, he was sitting in his car with the engine off, just staring at the steering wheel. I knocked on the window and he jumped like I'd scared him, then reached into his backseat and pulled out a gray hoodie that I recognized immediately as Giselle's favorite one. He handed it to me through the window, and his voice was quiet when he said he'd found it wedged under his passenger seat while cleaning out his car. I took the hoodie and felt something heavy in the front pocket, so I reached in and pulled out a folded piece of notebook paper with Giselle's handwriting on it. The note just said 3 things in her careful print. Ravine, 8:30, alone. My hand started shaking so badly I almost dropped it because this was proof that she'd planned to meet someone at the exact spot where she died. Miles watched me read it and asked what it meant, and I told him this was evidence that needed to go to the police right now. We drove straight to the station, and Detective Compton took the note with gloved hands, studying it carefully before bagging it as evidence. He explained that handwriting analysis would confirm it was Giselle's, and the note established that she had a planned meeting at the ravine rather than going there randomly. This changed everything because it meant someone had asked her to meet them there, someone she trusted enough to go alone at night. Detective Compton called Ada Roman right there in front of us, and I could hear her excited voice through the phone even though I couldn't make out the words. Within an hour, Alaya was at the police station reviewing all the evidence we'd gathered so far, spreading photos and reports across a conference table like pieces of a puzzle. She explained that the note combined with the burned emails, the motel receipts, the threatening messages, and the shoe print created enough probable cause for an arrest warrant on obstruction of justice and tampering with evidence charges. The murder charge would take more time to build because they needed to prove Mr. Harris was actually at the ravine when Giselle died, but at least these charges could get him off the streets while they kept investigating. Alaya started drafting the warrant petition that night, and she told me it would probably take a few days to get a judge to sign off on it. I felt this weird mix of relief and frustration because we were finally making progress, but it still wasn't enough, not yet. The next morning, I saw Mr. Harris at the coffee shop near school, and I made sure to arrive at the same time he usually got his morning coffee. I had my phone in my jacket pocket with the voice recorder app already running, and I positioned myself in line right behind him. When he turned around with his coffee and saw me, his face went pale and he tried to walk past me quickly. I stepped slightly to the side and asked him how he was holding up with everything going on, keeping my voice casual and concerned like I was just a worried student. He stopped and his eyes darted around the coffee shop before he answered that it was all just mistakes and misunderstandings that would get cleared up soon. I asked what kind of misunderstandings, and he started talking faster, saying that people were making assumptions based on incomplete information and taking things out of context. His coffee cup was shaking in his hand, and I could see sweat on his forehead, even though the shop was cool inside. I mentioned that I'd heard about emails being deleted, and he immediately got defensive, saying that everyone deletes old emails and it doesn't mean anything suspicious. The more he talked, the more nervous he sounded, and I knew the recording would capture that tremor in his voice, that barely controlled panic of someone who knows they're caught. He finally seemed to realize he was saying too much and cut himself off mid-sentence, then practically ran out of the coffee shop without even saying goodbye. I stopped the recording and sent it immediately to Detective Compton with a message explaining what had just happened. 2 days later, I was sitting in chemistry class when I heard sirens outside, and everyone rushed to the windows to see 3 police cars pulling up to the school. The principal's voice came over the intercom asking Mr. Harris to report to the main office immediately, but he never showed up because the police went straight to his classroom instead. Students in that class later said the officers came in and asked him to step outside, then told him they had a warrant for his arrest. By the time I got out of class and into the hallway, they were already walking him toward the exit in handcuffs while his wife stood at the end of the corridor watching. She just stood there completely still with her arms crossed, not crying or calling out to him, just watching them take him away like she was watching a stranger. Her silence felt louder than any words could have been, like she was finally done protecting him from the consequences of his actions. The whole school was buzzing with whispers and phone cameras recording everything, and I felt this strange, hollow satisfaction, seeing him finally face some kind of justice. Within an hour, the school district sent out an emergency email announcing that Mr. Harris had been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of legal proceedings. The statement was carefully worded to avoid admitting any wrongdoing, and it included this whole section about their thorough hiring practices and background checks that made me want to scream. Students were angry and scared, gathering in groups in the hallways talking about how the school had let this happen, how they'd protected him while Giselle suffered. The building felt like it might explode with all the rage and fear and confusion swirling around, and teachers seemed just as lost as we were about how to handle it. Byron published an article that afternoon with quotes from students about feeling betrayed by the administration, and the school board had to schedule an emergency meeting to address the crisis. Meanwhile, Detective Compton called to tell me that the tech forensics team had finished analyzing Mr. Harris's seized computer and found something huge. They'd recovered draft emails from his trash folder that matched the burned fragments I'd found in his backyard perfectly, including the full text of his threat to destroy Giselle if she told anyone about their relationship. This was the smoking gun we needed. Actual physical proof on his own computer that he'd threatened her right before she died. The draft emails also showed he'd been planning what to say to her, revising his threats multiple times before printing them out, which demonstrated premeditation and intent. Alaya explained that this evidence would be crucial for eventually building a murder case because it established motive and showed he was willing to harm Giselle to protect himself. I felt this surge of vindication knowing we'd been right about him all along, that all the investigating and risk had led to real proof of his guilt. That same day, Detective Compton told me they'd finished analyzing Miles's phone GPS data, and it confirmed he'd been at home during the entire time window when Giselle was killed. His phone hadn't moved from his house between 7 p.m. and midnight, and cell tower records backed that up completely. Detective Compton officially cleared him as a suspect, and told me Miles was just a grieving boyfriend who'd had the bad luck of fighting with Giselle right before she died. I felt guilty for ever doubting him, for making his grief harder by treating him like a criminal when he was already dealing with so much pain. The next week, Buck got arrested in a separate drug raid on his house, and police found enough pills and cash to charge him with distribution and possession with intent to sell. He maintained loudly to everyone who would listen that he had nothing to do with Giselle's murder, that he'd already told police everything he knew. One danger was reduced even if it didn't solve the main problem, and I felt weird about celebrating his arrest because he'd actually helped us by confirming Giselle paid her debt. On Thursday afternoon, Alaya called a press conference at the courthouse steps, and I watched it live on my phone during lunch period. She stood at a podium with Detective Compton beside her and announced that her office was declining to file murder charges at this time, but was proceeding with obstruction of justice and illicit relationship with a minor charges against Mr. Harris. I felt deflated watching her explain that they needed to build an airtight murder case and couldn't rush it just because of public pressure. She outlined the evidence they had so far and promised the investigation would continue, but I wanted her to say he was charged with killing Giselle, not just covering it up. After the press conference, Alaya called me directly and explained that murder cases require proof beyond reasonable doubt, and right now they had strong circumstantial evidence, but no direct proof he was at the ravine. She promised they were working on it and the obstruction charges would at least keep him locked up while they built the stronger case. The following Monday, I was walking to my car after school when I heard shouting from the main entrance, and I ran over to see Mr. Harris being led out in handcuffs while at least 20 students filmed on their phones. He was yelling that he didn't kill anyone, that this was all a mistake, that the truth would come out eventually. His voice sounded desperate and angry, and he kept turning his head trying to avoid the cameras, but there was nowhere to hide. I stood there watching him get put into the police car and felt this shaky relief wash over me, like finally something was happening even if it wasn't everything I'd hoped for. He'd threatened Giselle, destroyed evidence, abused his position of trust, and now he was facing consequences even if they weren't the full justice she deserved yet. The next morning at the school, I walked through the main entrance and immediately felt the shift in how people looked at me. Groups of students stopped talking when I passed, and a few whispered loud enough for me to hear words like snitch and attention seeker. In the cafeteria, I sat alone at a table near the windows, because my usual friends weren't making eye contact when I approached them. Someone had written RAT on my locker in black marker, and I spent 10 minutes scrubbing it off with hand sanitizer from my backpack, while other students walked by and stared. A girl from my chemistry class told me I ruined a good teacher's life over nothing, and that Mr. Harris was innocent until proven guilty. Her friends nodded along, and one of them said I was probably just jealous of Giselle and wanted attention now that she was gone. I tried explaining that evidence doesn't lie, but they just rolled their eyes and walked away. By lunch on the third day, I was eating in my car because the cafeteria felt too hostile and I couldn't handle more dirty looks or whispered comments. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from people I barely knew calling me a liar and saying I should be ashamed. Part of me wondered if doing the right thing was worth becoming the most hated person at the school. Monica called me to her office on Thursday afternoon, and I expected another lecture about staying out of trouble. Instead, she told me she'd been talking to the principal and other administrators about making sure I was protected from retaliation. She explained that she'd argued I needed support, not punishment, and that what I'd done took courage even if it made people uncomfortable. I was surprised because Monica and I had fought so many times about my investigation, and I thought she disapproved of everything I'd done. She said she'd been trying to protect me all along, but in ways I didn't understand at the time, like keeping me from getting expelled or sued. Her voice was gentle when she told me that sometimes doing the right thing means standing alone for a while, but that doesn't make it wrong. I felt tears starting and blinked them back while thanking her for believing me. She handed me a pass to leave early if I needed to and told me her door was always open. Walking out of her office, I felt less alone than I had in days. Byron found me in the library after school and said he wanted to help me write a public statement. He'd brought his laptop and a list of verified facts we could include without speculation or accusations. We spent 2 hours going through everything point by point and making sure every detail was accurate and provable. Byron suggested focusing on the timeline and evidence rather than naming suspects or making claims about guilt. He helped me write sentences that laid out what I'd found and when, without editorializing or assuming motives. The final statement was 3 paragraphs explaining my investigation, the evidence I'd discovered, and my cooperation with police. Reading it back felt powerful because for once I was controlling my own story instead of letting rumors and gossip define what happened. Byron posted it on the school newspaper's website, and within an hour it had been shared across social media. Some comments were still hostile, but others thanked me for being brave and said they believed me now that they'd seen the facts laid out clearly. Giselle's parents released their own statement the next morning through their lawyer. I read it on my phone during first period and felt my throat get tight. They acknowledged missing signs that their daughter was struggling and said they'd been so focused on her achievements that they didn't see the pressure crushing her. The statement asked for privacy while they grieved and said they hoped other parents would learn from their mistakes. They thanked law enforcement for their work and said they trusted the legal process to bring justice. Reading those words, I felt complicated emotions swirling together because they were victims too, even if they'd failed Giselle in important ways. They'd lost their daughter and had to live with knowing they didn't protect her from the dangers that killed her. Part of me was angry at them for not noticing sooner, but another part understood that parents aren't perfect, and sometimes love isn't enough to save someone. Aliyah called me that afternoon and asked me to come to her office at the courthouse. She explained that Mr. Harris's lawyer was discussing a plea deal on the obstruction of justice charges to avoid a trial. The murder investigation was still active and under review, but building a murder case takes time, and they needed evidence beyond reasonable doubt. She walked me through the legal standards and explained why circumstantial evidence wasn't always enough for a conviction, even when everyone involved knew someone was guilty. I felt frustrated hearing that we might never get a murder charge even though I was certain he'd killed Giselle. Aliyah was patient with my questions and said justice is often partial and imperfect, but that doesn't mean we stop trying. She promised the investigation would continue and that every piece of evidence mattered. Leaving her office, I had to accept that the legal system moves slowly, and sometimes the truth isn't enough to guarantee the outcome you want. Miles was waiting by my car in the parking lot the next day, and I tensed up expecting another confrontation. Instead, he apologized for how aggressive he'd been earlier and said grief had made him lash out at the wrong person. He handed me a card for his therapist and said talking to someone had helped him process everything without self-destructing. We stood there in the cold afternoon air and talked for the first time as 2 people who both cared about Giselle, rather than as suspects circling each other. Miles told me he missed her every day and wished he'd done more to help her escape the situation she was trapped in. I said I was sorry for suspecting him and that I understood why he'd been defensive. He nodded and said forgiveness was possible even after everything that happened between us. We weren't going to be friends, but at least we weren't enemies anymore. The school board held an emergency meeting and announced new policies on staff-student boundaries and mandatory reporting of concerning behavior. They outlined specific rules about teacher-student contact outside school hours and created a confidential reporting system for students who felt uncomfortable. The changes were comprehensive and showed they were taking the situation seriously, even if it came too late to help Giselle. Watching the board members explain the reforms, I felt bittersweet validation that real change was happening because of her death. These policies should have existed before she needed them, and maybe if they had, she'd still be alive. But at least future students would have protections and ways to report problems before they became tragedies. Detective Compton called with an update about Buck's cooperation with the investigation. Buck had given police detailed information about the drug distribution network in exchange for reduced charges on his own case. The information helped them seize money and drugs from the house and shut down several routes that supplied pills to high school students. Compton said fewer kids would end up in Giselle's situation, now that one of the main suppliers was out of business. I felt careful hope hearing that some good might come from this nightmare, even though it wouldn't bring her back. The drug trade would probably fill the gap eventually, but maybe it would take time, and maybe some kids would get help before they got trapped like she did. I drove to the ravine alone at dusk on Saturday, and parked where I'd found Giselle's car weeks ago. Walking through the woods, I followed the same path I'd taken that terrible afternoon and tried not to think about finding her body. At the bottom of the ravine, I knelt down and pulled a folded piece of paper from my pocket. I'd written Giselle a note telling her I tried to find the truth, and I was sorry it wasn't enough to get full justice. I tucked it under a rock near where she'd been lying, and said a quiet goodbye to the girl I'd barely known, but had come to understand through investigating her death. The grief felt different now, softer and more manageable, like I was standing on steadier ground even though nothing was resolved perfectly. She deserved better than what happened to her, and better than the partial justice we might get. But I'd done everything I could, and maybe that had to be enough. Detective Compton met me for coffee on Monday, and told me the murder case remained open and active. He said the investigation would continue, but encouraged me to step back now and focus on my own life. I'd done more than anyone expected and given them leads that might never have surfaced otherwise. He promised they'd keep working the case and following every angle until they had enough evidence for charges. I believed him because he'd been straight with me from the beginning about what was possible and what wasn't, but I also knew some questions might never have answers, and I had to make peace with that uncertainty. Justice doesn't always look the way we want it to, and sometimes doing everything right still isn't enough to fix what's broken. I started showing up to all my classes the next week and actually paid attention, instead of thinking about the investigation constantly. My teachers were understanding about the makeup work, and I spent evenings catching up on assignments I'd ignored while chasing leads. Byron texted me asking if I wanted to help create a resource guide for students about reporting abuse safely, and I said yes immediately, because having a purpose beyond the investigation felt necessary. We met at the library after school and outlined sections about recognizing warning signs, documenting evidence properly, and finding trusted adults to tell. Working on something that might help other students avoid Giselle's situation made the pain feel less pointless, like I could turn what I learned into something useful. Byron handled the writing while I contributed ideas from my experience about what actually works versus what adults think works. We included information about going outside the school system if administrators protect staff members and how to stay safe while gathering evidence. The guide took 3 weeks to finish, and the school newspaper published it despite some teachers objecting to the content. Looking back on everything now, I know we got partial justice at best. Mr. Ed Harris is facing serious charges for the affair and obstruction, but the murder case might never result in a conviction even though I'm certain he killed her. The systems that let him prey on students for years are only starting to change because we forced the issue. The scars from this experience will last forever, both for me and everyone who knew Giselle, but I'm committed to keep telling uncomfortable truths, even when people don't want to hear them. That's what she deserved, and that's what future students will need if we want to stop this from happening again.